Pasta plus beans. The amide of the pasta plus the amide of the beans create a really creamy soup that we call pasta e fagioli. Pasta e fagioli is a recipe that you can find in all over the part of Italy. Okay?
You just heard the phrase pasta e fagioli. That means pasta and beans, and that's what we're going to do today. It is really simple, and to be honest, there is no definitive recipe. This is one of those recipes that developed over time based on where you were, what part of Italy, what part of the world you were in, what was available to you, what you were growing. So there's a lot of flexibility here, and I hope you'll enjoy trying it too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with 3 tablespoons of olive oil. And the olive oil in Italy is wonderful, but you can also find some really nice olive oil varieties here. So we're going to put that in our pot. And you would wait for that to warm up. We may not have enough time while we're here today, but that's going to warm up fairly quickly. And to that, I'm going to add 1 medium onion or 1 cup of onion, whichever is going to work for you. Again, this is a soup, so it's not something, if you have 3/4 of a cup of onion from chopping up 1 onion, don't go chop up another one just to fill that out. I'm also going to do about a cup of carrots, and this is the same. Now, the recipe, one of them that I saw indicated it would be 1 medium carrot. I found the size of carrot I had, in order to get about a cup, I needed 2. So again, it's the same. The same with the celery. You just want to try and chop them all so that they're about the same size. What we're going to do on this is let those 3 ingredients simmer together or saute together in that olive oil. You can turn that down a little bit. I've got it on a medium high, and you just want it to go until the onion becomes translucent, so somewhere between 3 to 4 minutes. All right, we're not trying to fully cook these, we're just softening them up a bit. I'm going to add 2 cloves of chopped garlic or minced garlic, 1/4 of a teaspoon of crushed red pepper, and a teaspoon of a dried Italian seasoning. Now here's where you can start to make it your own a little bit. Like, I guess anywhere up to this point you could. But if you've got fresh herbs, this would be a great point to use some fresh rosemary, some fresh thyme, and so on, instead of using the dried. That would be a really good thing. You're going to saute this briefly. You want to cook the garlic a little bit, but you don't want to give it a chance to burn. You also want to help some of the flavoring come out of those herbs. So it's about 30 to 60 seconds on that. And then to that, I'm going to add a cup of chopped tomatoes. Now, I blanched the tomatoes and went ahead and chopped them up. They were fresh tomatoes. You could also use canned tomatoes so that you could make this more of a recipe that you could make from your pantry quite easily. And then I've got 6 cups of broth. I'm using chicken broth. You could use vegetable broth if you wanted to make it vegetarian. I've used a lower sodium variety simply because we're going to add ingredients later on. They're going to add some sodium to it. And I actually had a friend who spoke of traveling in Italy recently and said the food was too salty. So if you're used to a low sodium diet, some of these ingredients that we add will bump it up to a place where you might not be comfortable with it. So we've added those to it. We're going to bring it up to a boil. And when it boils, we're going to add the pasta. Now, you heard that the pasta that was used for this dish traditionally were the bad pieces, the pieces that were the trims that they re-rolled or recut in order to put them in. And it's a great thing to do if you're making your own pasta. Most of us don't. And so I'm going to show you a couple of alternatives if you're not going to go to that level where you're going to be making your own pasta. One thing that you can use that I'm using today is ditalini. And that's just small elbows. You can see here, not elbows, but small tubes, really short tubes that will cook fairly quickly. You could also use something like fettuccine or linguine, but instead of using it like this, you're just going to break it up into smaller pieces and then it becomes bad pieces. So those are a couple of alternatives. You could use other kinds of pasta too. If you have lasagna noodles that you often the boxes you don't need the same number that come in the box, and so if you got a couple of those left, you can break those up and put those in. Now, how long your pasta is going to cook is going to depend on which one of those options you choose. You want to cook your pasta until it's al dente, which means to the tooth, not too tender, so it's still got a little bit of bite to you, because it's not the last thing going in the pot, and when it's done, it's not when you take it off. So if you cook it too long, you're going to overcook the pasta. So we're going to need to make sure that we add the pasta so that, and then add the next ingredient before the pasta is completely done. Now, some of the recipes for pasta fagioli are quite a bit different than this. Some of the earlier ones and ones that I found in Italian cookbooks don't have the tomatoes, they don't have the carrots, they don't have the celery. They are basically pasta and beans, so that it's quite a bit different. One of the other things that you'll see as you go across the country to different parts of the country, some of them will have meats, like ground meat or leftover chopped meat. It is fairly common in some parts of the country. Some of them will have a lot more vegetables. Some will have a type of kale, an Italian kale. So there's a lot of variation, again, depending on what part of the country you're in. So the recipes are fully dependent from a traditional standpoint of where they're located in the country and what they can grow. That's what they'll put in. This would be a low-income dish, the peasant dish, and so they're not going to have fancy things. They're not going to have much meat, and so meat was not part of this. Although they did raise hogs in this part of the country, they wouldn't have been eaten in quantity. So those are just some of the differences. When this gets up to a boil, I'll add the pasta. We'll cook it for the ditalini. It's about 6 minutes till it's al dente, and then we'll come back and finish it off. When your pasta is done, make sure that you check it, bite into it and see, make sure that it's done. Again, you've got a little bit more cooking to do. What we're going to add now, we've got the pasta in our pasta e fagioli, but we don't have any beans. So we're going to add cannellini beans to it. This would be the traditional bean that would be used in most parts of Italy. However, remember, you don't live in Italy, so we're going to talk in a minute about what you can use if you can't find those. Sometimes they are harder to find here. I'm also going to add to it a half of a teaspoon of black pepper, a half of a teaspoon of kosher salt, and a 1/4 of a cup of freshly chopped parsley. Now here again, if you wanted to actually add some vegetable to it, you could add some chopped kale, cut into ribbons, or some spinach instead of the parsley or in addition to it. This basically just needs to be hot, so basically that's done. So we're going to give that a couple of minutes, and while that finishes up, I'm going to look over here briefly. Here's a tomato, just an example of how it's blanched, a very shallow X on the bottom in boiling water for 30 seconds, 30 to 60, depending on how ripe it is, and that skin is going to peel right away. But these are the beans. Here's dried beans. I could not find dried cannellini beans. These are Great Northerns, and these are also Great Northerns that are canned. Remember, this is something that you could make directly from your pantry. So I was looking for canned beans. You could also cook your beans ahead, freeze them, and have them ready in the freezer, and you could do the same thing with those. These are actually the cannellini beans, so they're close, a little bit bigger. Cannellini beans are sometimes referred to as white kidney beans. So I've got here for you as a reference a red kidney bean. All of these were the same price in the market. Again, if you can't find the one, you could substitute another. If your recipe calls for ground beef, for instance, red kidney beans are probably going to be fine, or light kidney beans, or even pinto beans. The idea is to get those nutrients and the things that grow in your area so that you're taking something Italian and making it American based on what you have access to here. And this should be done by now. So it is a recipe that peasants would use, and there's absolutely no reason that you shouldn't enjoy it too, no matter what your income. It's pasta e fagioli for Oklahoma Gardening. I'm Barbara Brown.
Hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.